and hopefully Scotland will do us a favour, and we go through.
Did you see any of Scotland's game with Samoa?
No, I didn't see too much of that either, to be honest. But I wouldn't be too worried about Samoa.
Yeah, why not?
It's a good question, Joe. I don't know.
OTB's State of the Union with Keith Wood.
Okay, welcome along to part 2 of this week's edition of Keith Wood's State of the Union. And our guest this week is James Robson, who's a doctor who's steeped in rugby, really. Keith, this is a guest that you wanted to have on the show for quite a while now. Maybe you might fill us in a bit on James's background.
Yeah, we've no real scene set for today at all, Ger. We're taking a slightly different tack. I think most people are suffering a level of COVID information overload. So I'm happy enough to abuse my position in off-the-ball sports and bring you one of my favourite people on the planet to discuss his time in rugby and his philosophy around team medicine. Ian McGeechan once said to both of us, actually, you'll meet each other in the street in 30 years' time and there'll just be a look and you'll know how special some days in your life are. That was 30 years ago, or 23 years ago, not quite 30. So, Doc, James Robson, how are you? It's great to see you.
Well, I'm good. It's funny you should mention Geach and that sort of look across. I remember walking quietly with my wife in Richmond and a car nearly sort of knocking me over, and the window gets wound down saying, how you doing, Robson, you old bee? So I think you might have been responsible for that conversation.
That's very true. It's good. I know you're supposed to have a wink across the street, but I'm quite happy to give you a hard time when I see you.
Let's be a bit more direct, because that's what we do on and off the pitch. You know, I mean, the beauty of our game is that the friendships that are created, and particularly Lions, which are really close to my heart, the friendships that you make are long lasting. You know, we haven't spoken for ages, and sometimes it's entirely my fault because you get wrapped up in work. But yeah, it's great to see you.
Well, I'm happy to blame you for that, Doc, actually. But it is because like, you do make friendships over a period of time, and I think we should touch maybe straight on that in terms of the Lions in '97, and we'll go back a bit further after that. But what is it about the Lions that just sets you alight?
No, it's hard to describe. As a non-player, it's still the pinnacle of my career. It's the ability to come together with the four nations. We have 6 nations, we have 5 nations, we've had 4 nations, where you guys go onto the pitch and you're incredibly combative, you knock shit out of each other, and then afterwards you shake hands. And the Lions is that par excellence. To me, it's the biggest sporting event of the 4 years. That it's bigger than the Olympics, because of that bonding, because of that necessity to bring people who were previously wholly just competitors and get them to develop bonds and friendship, and then to reproduce that on the field. It is just so special. It doesn't exist anywhere else.
Now, when we look at the Lions at the moment, it's been squeezed. It's been made shorter and shorter. Do you think we'll miss out on something there, because the bonding is the most essential part?
I think that certainly the players and officials will miss out. It'll still be a fantastic spectator sport. It'll be, worldwide phenomenon. But yeah, the longer you can be together, the better it is. And Geach taught me a real lesson in my first tour, because I was there in '93. And he said, James, after about 5 weeks, just be careful when you go back to normal life, because, you kind of become a little bit institutionalized. In those days, I was a GP, and I remember going back after 9 weeks and straight back in, because, we didn't get paid. We used our holidays. We got a little bit of help and an allowance. So arrived back from New Zealand, I think on Saturday night, Monday morning into general practice. First patient goes out in the waiting room. Mrs. Smith, would you like to come in? Little old lady comes in and she sits down and says, Mrs. Smith, how can you help you? Oh, there's nothing wrong, Dr. Robson. I just thought I'd come and see how you got on the tour. Oh, for F's sake. They never let me forget that. For the next 10 years of my life, I had to do house calls.
I love it. I used to describe it, Geach called it institutionalized. I used to say we'd become slightly feral after it, because you're just in this, you're kind of locked away for 2 or 3 months effectively, and living in each other's pockets, and understanding how everybody reacts. And like you mentioned, bonding. And I want to talk about medicine in terms of it and your philosophy on it and how you look at it in team medicine. But, and I've read a few parts of interviews that you've had over the years, and it's understanding the players that well, so that different players react in different circumstances and have different ways of showing injury and whatever, and that you looked at your job almost as being a watching brief.
Yeah, it's a privileged position that we occupy as medics, and we become aware of everybody's inner thoughts. You know, people share intimate knowledge of their own life with us, and that is an absolute privilege and not one that should ever be abused. But by the same token, it gives you an insight into the psyche, and you develop an understanding of how they react to injury and illness. And everybody is different, and particularly rugby players, there's a whole spectrum of people, and it's finding the ways to be able to interpret what's happening to that individual, and then see how you can help them with the knowledge that you have of medicine and of physiotherapy. And I think proximity helps, you know, being part of the team. You know, people who come in and perhaps have to look after a team just for a day just don't quite get it. If you have to look after a team for weeks on end, and that's where we're privileged with our sport, going on tour is a fantastic asset to just getting to know each other, not just getting to know the players, getting to know the staff as well, because of course we end up looking after everybody.
But you trained first as a physio, yeah, and then as a doctor. Do you find that gave you a kind of jump ahead of a lot of the other doctors that were on?
I think it helped because, of course, it's a physical sport, and physical therapy, physiotherapy, is paramount into helping to restore people. And one of the big differences between medicine and physiotherapy is just that hands-on approach. It allows you, you know, God forbid, in current circumstances, of course, we're encouraged not to breach proximity and distance. But as a physiotherapist, you're used to getting your hands on to people and from an early stage. And that helps create that bond. And I was very lucky, I think, having the double qualification, and I'm still proud to say that I continue with my physio registration, albeit I limit myself in my practice because I've got some very skilled colleagues. I think that combination allowed the Lions in particular, my first tour, to look at my appointment as an extra physio going. So in effect, going with Kevin Murphy, Smurf, absolutely fantastic guy, learned so much from Smurf. He was there as physiotherapist, I was there as doctor, but I was able to help out on the physical side as well.
I remember on the tour, it's funny, I have my two favourite doctors that I had in my career are yourself and Dr. Mick Malloy, who you'd know.
Mick's a wonderful guy.
Yeah, who'd played second row for Ireland and then became our doctor. And look, we talked risk yesterday with Éanna Falvey, or earlier with Éanna Falvey. But risk in relation to you is entirely different. This was my read on you, actually, was that the risk is what is the right thing to do for that particular person at that particular time. So you could have an injury, but your understanding of the risk as to whether you should play or not play, for me, seemed to be a bit of a step ahead. So I knew there was a couple of matches on the lines that I probably, if it was today, there's no way they'd let you play. I had an ankle injury, but I felt good about it. I think you understood me to say it isn't about playing, it's actually about playing well and about not doing any further
harm.
Yeah. I just thought your risk assessment was different to the vast majority.
Now, that's very kind of you to say, but that's the approach I've always had. It's a collaborative approach. It's between you, the coach, and the player. So there's that triumvirate of people. And above all, you have to be safe. And that doesn't mean that carrying an injury or a niggle makes you unsafe, but you have to be safe. You have to know that you're going to perform to the best of your ability so you don't let yourself down. But most of all, you don't let your teammates down. And it's understanding that there are people who can cope with those niggles or those slight injuries, and there are other people that can't cope. And it's coming to that, you know, that risk reward ratio, and then hopefully, you know, allowing people to do what they do best. And you know, I've been very blessed with one or two people thanking me over the years for actually taking a chance and allowing them to play. A coach who I'm working close with at the moment actually said thanks, reminiscing about getting to a World Cup that he thought that others would have ruled him out. So yeah, don't take unnecessary risk. I'm the guy that buys insurance policies, but by the same token, I'm also the guy that's willing to, you know, risk and reward. Every day I travel from Dundee to Murrayfield, except in the lockdown period. My risk of having an accident goes up by virtue of the fact that I spend more time on the road than I used to. Same token, people going onto the pitch, exposure equals increased risk. But we've just got to look at all of these situations and decide how can we make it as safe as possible without taking away the actual fun of the game.
James, I'm interested in Keith's case in particular, for example. How long into knowing him are you confident? And maybe to take it away from Keith or anybody, or maybe if you want to talk specifically about Keith, how long do you have to get to know somebody before you can sit down with them and say, you have a sore ankle, I don't think you're going to do significant damage to it. If you think you can play through it, then you have my blessing. Or, you know, how do you feel about it? How does that relationship evolve?
That's not a science. It's an art, and it's a gut feeling. In my opinion, you know, there's a lot of things about evidence-based medicine and about following protocols and stuff like that. You can meet people. I met somebody that I'd never met before yesterday and instantly warmed to them and actually would trust them. Another doctor would trust them with a great deal of information that I wouldn't trust another person. Keith was one of those people that you could warm to straight away. He's quite a fearsome character to many, but for me, he was just a wonderful guy. And I think very hard to give a hard and fast. Sometimes I've taken several weeks, several months to get to know a player. Other times I feel as though I've known them all my life after the first meeting. So I think it's very much down to each individual relationship, and that varies across the board.
I would have said in terms of the Lions, because it's so unusual, because we are effectively enemies the week before and then having to be friends very quickly and having to trust people very quickly, if you don't go into the Lions as an open book, I think it delays too many things. And I actually think the guys who go in that are open to change, open to new ideas, open to sharing their ideas, I think that actually makes you a really good Lions tourist. Yeah. Because there's no block that you have to get over, because you don't have time for the block to get over. So I would have, look, we got on very well, yourself and Carcass, for the simple reason I would say this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, but I think they're actually okay. But can you just keep an eye on them and an eye on me? And I used to get great chats from you saying, yeah, but that's wrong as well, and that's wrong, and there's a bit hanging off over here. But because you can't hide anything on a tour like that.
No, indeed, we all open ourselves to each other on Lions tours, and even on international tours to a lesser extent. You can't help it. You're in close proximity. You share meal times together. You share the whole day together. You share the camaraderie of both defeat and victory. And in equal measure, it can help to strengthen those relationships.
I do think that's really interesting, how the backroom team has to build that trust and how open the player has to be. Because I presume if a player comes in and puts up a little bit of a barrier straight away, then you're far more reluctant to trust that person as you go down the road with them, because you don't feel like you've got a full picture of the evidence.
Yeah, I've got a few instances in my mind where that's the case, Joe, and you've just got to overcome those barriers, and you've got to kind of just explain where you're coming from and say, look, this is my thoughts. We'll try and work with you. Maybe you're thinking something a little different, but perhaps we can find some common ground and slowly but surely build up that trust on both sides.
You've obviously been around the game for the transition from the early days of professionalism to now, and the complete change in body shape, the fact that kids are coming out of the academy and they've been doing weights for 5-6 years. That injury profile and the injuries that you've started to discover, what impact is that having on the players as they get to their mid-20s and early 20s and early 30s?
That's a really good question. You've been kind to me because, of course, I transgressed through amateur to early professional and now to professional. This is my 30th international season, and I've got club and other memories behind me. Body shape has changed and styles have changed, and we've gone from attritional to skill-based to evasion, back to attritional, back to power, back to collisions, and hopefully now we're starting to tease that apart. And it's difficult to know, other than anecdotally and from small studies, and by small studies I mean small amounts of time because we're still in evolution, just what the implication of bringing our young people in through the kind of academy structures that we all have now and starting early. When in Keith's day and likes of Wade Dooley and Peter Winterbottom, all these greats of the game, when I first came in as a young physio and doctor, they were around for many, many years, and slowly but surely we're seeing a compacting, we're seeing a shortening of careers. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, I don't know. In the amateur days, of course, many people had an actual career or a place of employment, a job, as well as playing rugby. Now rugby is their employment and their job. And we've got to look very carefully at how we manage them. And I think we've changed over the last 2 or 3 years for the better. I think we're more aware of the stress that we put on young people coming into a very physical environment. And we've become more aware of their mental well-being and mental unwellness. And so we're managing that better. We're now starting to look much more closely, and I say we globally, much more closely at the player load. And that's very important because for a while we were getting carried away and allowing people to really play all the hours that were available. And now we know that we've got to start rotating and we've got to start pulling back. It's a sad state of affairs when occasionally somebody gets an injury and they say, oh, that was great because I got a few weeks off. I think we just got to be well aware that is an issue, and going forwards it may translate into perhaps, it's not become the norm, but it's not unusual for most people to have some form of restorative surgery. That has to take a toll on your body at some point in the future.
James, rugby has always been a little bit defensive about changes to the game, about reacting to maybe some of the health issues that happen to it, concussion being one of them, but even the preponderance of different types of injuries at different times after different laws. You haven't been. You've been very open from the very, very start. So if somebody says we have to make a change, your reaction has always been great. If it makes the game better and safer, that's what happens. Have you had much resistance within the medics in rugby to your particular stance?
No, I've sometimes had people chip in and perhaps criticise me for speaking out, and that happened to me recently. I don't speak out for speaking out's sake. If somebody asks me a question, I endeavour to try and give them an answer. And I was once approached by some officials and said, look, by being open and by talking about injury, are you not going to make parents frightened of allowing their kids to come and play rugby? I said, they should be more frightened if we weren't actually telling them about the risks, if we weren't telling them that we're trying to make the game as safe as we can. So, you know, I'm nervous about flying. I don't like turbulence. The thing that sets me at ease is if the pilot comes on and says, look, guys, you know, we're going to have about an hour or two and it's going to be smooth. And then it looks as though it might be a bit rough. When it gets rough, you think that guy has actually told me that and is expecting it. So likewise with injury and safety in sport, if we tell people that all aspects of life have some risk attached to it, and this particular aspect, be it football, rugby, athletics, gymnastics, whatever, has a risk to it, but we're looking at it, then that's got to be reassuring. And then it's all a matter of, you've got to decide in life what it is you want to do. You know, I love rugby, I love going abroad. My fear of flying doesn't stop me flying. The fact that I'm on the road in a car and therefore increase my risk of accident in the car, it doesn't stop me getting into the car. The risks in rugby shouldn't stop people doing and playing rugby if that's what they'd like to do. But there are so many choices to make in life that you've just got to give them the information and allow them to make their own choice.
For myself now, I have 3 sons, and I remember a mother asked me once, how can you honestly let your kids play rugby because you could be paralyzed playing rugby? And I said, exactly your point, that I try and educate them to what it is. I try and make certain that they're trained to be very, very safe, and so that they have that level of training when they go into it. But of course I would worry about it because the game has become an awful lot bigger. My boys are young, they're all teenagers, you know, they're not fully formed yet. And it's funny, actually, I find it quite amazing for things I never cared about for myself. I would happily go along, not with willful abandon, but sometimes definitely with willful abandon. But I'm far more sensitive when I look at the kids as to what happens or not. And I actually find I'm becoming more activist to make the game a little bit safer. And I think it's definitely coming from the viewpoint of a parent. And I think it's important, actually, that guys who've played the game, who love the game, and that was the point you just said there, you love it, yet you've seen some fairly horrific injuries in your time, not too many, I hope, but and I've had a load of injuries with it. But would I play again? Yes. Would I say to my kids, play? Yes, provided you know how to do it safely and well. And I think that is a big part for our game. But you still love it, don't you? Even with all that risk?
My biggest problem at the moment is, as I get older, I still love it, and I'm dreading the thoughts of some point in having to say, yeah, my time's over, and let somebody else carry on.
Strangely for me, Doc, when I went to retire, I said 17 years since I retired. I hadn't told anybody I was retiring. I knew I was going to retire. I retired 2 weeks too early, and I know our listeners are sick of me saying that. I wanted to get to a final, but it wasn't bad. It didn't seem to build up to being a big thing. It was right at the right time, and I was relatively young. I was 31. But I think there's not a whole lot can take away from the memories that you have up to that 31 years.
Yeah, it's interesting because somebody asked me the other day, oh, your house must be full of rugby memorabilia. And I said, well, no, to be honest, my memorabilia is here. You know, it's the memories, it's the friendships, it's just discussing rugby at various times. You know, sitting down with Gregor, for instance, and start reminiscing about, you know, Lions and about World Cups and things like that. That is the reward for me. I've got one shirt on my wall, which was kindly given to me, and that just reminds me that life is a little bit perilous and that we need to live it to the full. And it's there as that reminder. But other than that, as I say, it's all up here.
Through all the years, Doc, what do you think has changed in the game?
I think some of the fun has gone out of it. I think we can still have fun, but I don't think it was as fun as our early years. We see less pranks being pulled. Gary Armstrong used to be the best joker in the pack and would do all sorts. So I think some of the fun has gone out, and probably that's correct because it's now a business, it's now a profession, it's now a place of work, and you can't just have banter the whole time. I think the fact that injuries have occurred, and I see people having to have more surgery than I would like in order to get them back onto the park. But again, that's part and parcel of professional sport. I see something that has helped. I do believe that globalization has occurred. I think we are getting to more places around the world with rugby. When I first started, it seemed quite limited, but having the World Cup in Japan was an amazing experience for everybody and opened up a whole new dimension worldwide. There's still more work to do if we want our sport to remain and to become even more global. But with that, of course, comes the likes of the pandemic that we've got. People travel all around the world. That's how the bug spread. So there's a measure of caution among that. Yeah, I think still it is the most sociable of sports. It's the sport that brings people who, as you say, are enemies or who are competitors together straight after the game's finished. What other sport can do that?
And if you look to the past, you have to look to the future. What do you envisage is going to happen to the game?
I'm hoping, so not what I envisage, but I hope that we're going to continue to make the game as safe as we possibly can. The flair and the skill. I'd like to get back to the days where people actually tried to run around people rather than run through them. And I think that's important.
It looks like we might be getting there. And it was interesting to hear Aina Falvey earlier on talk about how the analysis and science and the medical teams are beginning to have an impact on the laws of the game. I wonder, was that always the case? I mean, certainly it didn't seem that way. It seemed like law changes came from a different part of the sport as opposed to player health.
I think that player health, and I think the medics have brought into the fold in a way that was not always the case. But one of my predecessors, Donald MacLeod, one of the best sports, almost the grandfather of sports medicine over here. He was involved in the early medical committees, and it would be a negotiation. I remember them talking about how they first came to, it was 3 weeks straight off for concussion, and the medics were perhaps looking for a little, lawmakers perhaps a little shorter, and they compromised on 3 weeks, and there was no great science. Now we're looking much more closely at what we need to do, and the medics have influenced that. And I think it's incumbent on us as medics to speak up if we spot, if we feel, if we see things that we think are inherently wrong or dangerous. And I think that we've been given our place for that. But by the same token, we've still got to preserve the game such that people enjoy playing it. There's no point in making it so sterile and so, stringent that you can't actually go out and enjoy it.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. One of the hot topics in this part of the world has been the medicalization of the sport. And, we've heard from some of our colleagues about how they would take anti-inflammatories before matches. And is this something that you'd be concerned about, or what level of that have you seen that you kind of think that's too much and we need to rein this back in, or actually that's about right for what a contact sport should have?
With a contact sport, you sometimes do need painkillers. We try and say to guys, look, if you need to take something, take paracetamol. That's always been, I've always said anybody can do medicine, because at the end of the day, you just tell them to take 2 paracetamol and go to bed. Sleep's a great healer and paracetamol's a good painkiller. I think we have to be very careful about medication creeping into the game. And I think, for a while it perhaps was, and particularly the use of anti-inflammatories, ibuprofen, Voltarol, these kind of things, they have their place. They're there as medicines to help people with the likes of arthritis, osteoarthritis, etc., to make them better. They have a place to play, but we have to be very careful and very watchful, and we have to educate our players. You know, I remember we got to a point where people were saying, oh, I quite like some painkillers. And I said to them, look, you know, I'll show you the studies that show that that particular painkiller actually is detrimental to performance. All of a sudden, everybody backed off. They didn't want to have it because in that same meeting, we had the coaches. And the coaches are thinking, hang on a minute, if I see that guy taking that painkiller and he has a bad game, there's an association there, and that works well. And it's getting the buy-in. You've got to tell them what the risks are, what the benefits are, what the downside is, whether it's going to change what they do on the pitch for the better or for the worse. If it's going to be for the better, you could argue that that's performance enhancing and therefore they shouldn't take it anyways. So I think, you know, we've got to make sure that medication has its place, but it has its place for legitimate reasons. It's not just there as a smartie to be taken before a game to help you get through the game. If you need that smartie to get through the game, you've got to seriously think whether you should be playing that game.
I think that's exactly it. And has that evolved? Is that an ever-changing thing?
No, it's a constant, because of course you've got a new cohort of people coming through, so it's all about getting the education in early. So likes of our FOSROC academies at the moment, you know, our anti-doping educator goes in, the medics go in, and we tell them, because they're going to either see or hear from people elsewhere that, oh, if you were to take this, we've got to give them the information. Education is key. At the end of the day, if you can understand, a bit like me with my fear of flying, if I can understand why a plane stays in the air, I can actually legitimize it. If I can say to players why it's important not to take medication to get them through a game, they should understand that and hopefully comply. Sorry, I'm switching into doctor mode now.
No, you're dead right. The remarkable physics that keeps a plane in the sky is always something that I've, I don't want to think too much about that, I have to tell you.
Education is key. So on the Lions tour in '97, on the way out, I had to attend to an emergency at the back of the plane. I got a tap on the shoulder. I just kind of drifted off to sleep after a couple of glasses of well-deserved champagne. And I think we were just across Africa. A tap on the shoulder, and the stewardess says, I'm sorry, are you the team doctor? Yeah, there's a lady collapsed at the back of the plane. Do you mind coming back? And so we attended to this lady. Fortunately, it was something I could do because she'd fallen over, knocked herself out, and she needed stitches into a head wound. And I was asked to go up to the cockpit because the pilot was going to thank me because they didn't have to divert the plane. And I sat there for several hours after that. You know, I could have been in a very luxurious seat, and I was in the jump seat in the days when you could actually get up front. And he just told me so many things about flying, and I told him so many things about rugby medicine. We had that interchange, and we still remain friends, you know, 23, 25 years on. And it's that exchange of information that's key for me. You know, if somebody can tell me something that puts me at ease, and I can tell them something that helps them from a well-being point of view, that's a great exchange.
I think it all comes down to, when we start talking about medicalization and all that, it comes down to the rapport that the doctor has with the players. It obviously comes down to education, but that idea that actually there's a proper sense of trust between the two of them.
I remember a chap coming onto a Lions tour and saying, "Oh, could I get this?" And I said, "Well, actually, no, we don't do that." And he said, "Oh, well, my club does that." And I said, "No, we don't do that." "Well, why?" Explained the reasons why, and he said, "Oh, that's fine." Yeah. And I said, "You know, there are other ways that we can deal with this issue that I would prefer to use, and it's just a case of giving the information and hopefully seeing sense." Yeah.
And Keith, the '97 Lions, how banged up were you on that tour?
That's a nice laugh there, Doc. I was pretty banged up. I had an operation a few weeks before I went out to take a pin out of my shoulder. So I was bruising very heavily all the time. And I had some interesting conversations with the doc over it. So, well, I kind of treated my own self with the level of disrespect at that stage. And the doc was able to deal with that. Very few docs were able to deal with it.
He's one of these people that literally go where angels fear to tread. You know, he's not always been that careful about where he puts his body.
Yeah, that'd be fair enough. It was funny because the ground were hard. I was coming back from an injury. I was trying to build up my fitness as the tour went on. And when you're doing that, you always pick up a few little extra bangs. The training sessions were beyond brutal. I mean, for the idea of people looking at tours and they see the matches on a Saturday, my God almighty, behind the scenes. And I don't know if you remember, Doc, we had this bloody scrummaging machine.
Scrummaging session. That still haunts me. That still haunts me, actually, the scrummaging sessions.
I remember it was a hydraulic scrummaging machine that would build up 2.5 tons of pressure across our necks and shoulders in the front row. And I still remember Jim Telfer. We'd hit the scrum, and then we'd break up and we'd run over to the wall. And one of his lines was, "Sprint as fast as you can, and then accelerate."
Jim's responsible for some classics, but that's one of my favourites, actually.
Yeah, but I remember that we had one particular session, which was crazy. When you were looking at that, are you saying this is too much?
Yeah, but who says too much to Jim Telfer?
Well, you can say it to him. He just ignores it. I mean, it doesn't matter. I
remember being 2.5 hours into a forward session on the back pitches at Murrayfield, and the snow and the hail and everything was coming down, and everybody was going blue. And after much complaining, I said to Jim, "Look, we've really got to go in." And he brought the session to a halt, and he said, "Right, guys, inside, the soft dock is had enough." It was all blamed on me. When I went in, the place, "Oh, thank God, James, that was so." And he never let, he mentioned that, I think, for the next 2 years, the fact that I'd gone soft.
Oh, you were a hero.
Yeah, a hero to the players. Yeah, he could bear a grudge too, could Jim, couldn't he?
No, but always with a smile on his face, absolutely.
Yeah.
Listen, you've been great with your time. We've got to let you go and have your lunch. I did want to ask, whose is the one jersey that you have up?
That belongs to Tom Evans. Winger sadly injured his neck at Cardiff, and it was quite a nasty injury. And just, it was just one of those sort of heart-stopping moments. Unfortunately, Tom's gone from strength to strength. He's been on Strictly. He's now loved up with Nicole Scherzinger. And so life hasn't been too bad to Tom, but that jersey just reminds me every day that life is very fickle and not to treat it without a great deal of respect. And, when you're feeling pretty down, that's just a reminder that some people have to go through adversity that you've not had to go through, and therefore be thankful for where you are.
Well, look, it's been a great chat. Thanks so much for being part of this week's episode of Keith Woods.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Pleasure.
Dr. Robson, thanks very much.
Thank you.
OTB's State of the Union with Keith Wood.
OTB AM.